Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Friday, March 3rd, 2023. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad to have you guys here. Let's see, what were we looking at here? Okay. They were absolutely, I would say, they turned into little Napoleons, the people in power, when they got this, when they saw what China was doing. They copied China, and they turned into little Napoleons. And they, in this madness, what did they want to do? I mean, you can read it right here. All, all pets got to go. Cats first. That's what they were planning. Anyway, but they didn't get it through with it. They didn't get through with things that they were thinking about doing. But look at the harm they did to our children. An awful lot of kids now are behind. Behind on their education big time. And they're not catching up. Because there's certain years that kids have to learn certain things. That they learn them the easiest. Especially things that involve reading, writing, arithmetic. But not only that, the emotional scarring of our younger generation. Anyway, I got to move on here. We got a lot to talk about. Blinken and Lavrov. They have met for the first time since the Ukraine war. So these are the Russian side and the American side, but I don't think things are going well at all. We're in more danger right now than we were during the Cold War. And did you know during the Cold War, people were building these, what they called nuclear fallout shelters everywhere across America. People were building them. And it seemed like a really good idea. And in fact, it was a good idea. Yeah, the war didn't come. No, the bombs didn't fall during the Cold War. But they could have. And those shelters could have saved people's lives. But now, for some reason, since everybody says, well, the Cold War's ended, blah, 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 we don't need nuclear shelters anymore, and a lot of those shelters that were built back in the 1950s, 1960s, have rotted into the ground. Right? So we don't need them anymore. That's the new philosophy. Well, I'm going to tell you, what's going on right now is hotter than the Cold War. It's worse. It's worse than the Cold War. Now, which way will this thing switch between Ukraine and Russia and the war and China talking about taking Taiwan and the South China Sea and all this stuff that's going on? North Korea, U.S. drills near North Korea, and North Korea's infuriated and they're flying missiles off toward Japan and on and on. What's going to happen with all this? Well, it could all settle down. We could get some sort of a peace thing happen between. And war is one of these tricky things where it could escalate or it could disappear and vaporize and disappear. You just don't know which way. But what's your life worth? Take a look at something here. Look at this. This is Indiana Jones. Remember from the Indiana Jones movies? Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom and Indiana Jones in the Lost Pyramid or whatever. Maybe he didn't make Lost. Anyway, he did a whole bunch of these films back when. And one of the films there, he ended up in a nuclear test range or something, and they were going to blow up a nuclear bomb. He had no place to escape. He was going to get blown to bits by the nuclear bomb. But what he did was he found the refrigerator inside a house, and he climbed inside the refrigerator and shut the door behind him. And it saved his life in the film. But how much does that film relate to reality in this real world? Could something like a refrigerator save your life if there's a nuclear blast? Well, possibly. But there's no air inside a refrigerator. There's no ventilation. So you'd end up suffocating anyway. So this is just for a movie. But in reality, a nuclear fallout shelter wouldn't need to be that big. Of course, it should be big enough so you can stretch out. I mean, take a look at Indiana up behind my head here. He's all curled up inside the refrigerator, I mean, he can't stretch out or anything. And if you're in a fallout shelter, and there's fallout, you're probably going to have to stay in there for several days, and you don't want to be all crunched up for several days. But my point is, guys, I know the rich people can afford these nuclear fallout shelters that have all the luxuries of a penthouse apartment under the ground, And us, well, we would have to bury a trash can or something. I'm just joking there about that, But all joking aside, uh, a shelter is a shelter. It protects you from the radiation, but you listen. If you're going to think about anything like a small nuclear shelter, say you were going to build one out of steel or something, or wood or something, or anything, concrete, whatever you're going to build it out of, you got to think ventilation, guys. And you don't need it huge. I mean, it could only be the smallest, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, by maybe 4 feet high, or something like that. And what would that do? I mean, you'd have enough space to spread out inside it. But always think proper ventilation if you did think about building something like that. And proper ventilation to get rid of gases that are underneath the ground. Gases like there's radon gas underneath the ground, And if you're not properly ventilated, you'd end up breathing in radiation anyway that exists in the ground naturally if your shelter's not properly ventilated. And I've been toying with the idea, of a shelter that's not dug into the ground but would exist above the ground that would be covered with earth, making a mound. I've been toying with that idea, in my head, thinking about that. Anyway, guys, which way could this thing flip? Gosh only knows. This whole war. Could it flip into World War III? Yes. Could it disappear? Yes. In other words, it could get settled and disappear, and it could do that very quickly if they come to some sort of peace deals. So we're watching this situation, and at this point in time, I think it's less foolish to build a nuclear fallout shelter now than it was back during the Cold War when everybody was building them. Now is probably a better idea than it was back then. And it seemed logical back then, but now somehow with the general population it doesn't seem logical any longer. Go figure. Anyway, listen, guys, let's get on to the markets and talk a little bit. Now, here's one of the things I wanted to say before I get into the markets, real quick. This whole thing with the war might turn into World War III, or it might vaporize. But what's going on with the financial markets will not disappear. It's going to get much, much worse very quickly. So this is the second situation we're facing right now, is what's going on in the financial markets. And it's definitely not going to disappear. It's going to get much, much worse. And as it gets worse, it's going to be more and more strain on the silver supply. Oh my gosh, the Indians, people in India, are buying the silver up like it's going out of style, like it's hotcakes coming off of a hot griddle, and they're hungry, and they're just sucking up the silver, putting more constraint on a dwindling supply. Meanwhile, the price is going down. That makes any sense. Okay, getting on, taking a look at the silver price today. 2103. It's up 13 cents on the day so far. Yeah, I mean, we were up around $24. Now we're down 21, and we're facing this side of supply constraints that it's going to get ready to start really seeing it. They just can't keep up. The mines are not producing enough to keep up with the amount of demand. And demand's really going to increase now as people start to realize, hey, you know what? They're making our dollars worthless. We got to hedge. Here it comes. Taking a look at gold today. Gold is at $18.45. It's up $9.80. Let's take a look at cryptos today. And Bitcoin is it's been slowly meandering back down again. It's 22,391. No, 361. 22,362 right now. 1568 for Ethereum. Taking a look at the Dow Jones today. It's up 187 points at 33,190. If we take a look now at the S&P 500, and it is up 36 points at 4,017. Now we're going to take a look at crude oil, 79.02. It's up 86 cents today. Let's take a look at bonds and rates. And bring in my U.S. Treasuries. We're looking at falling yields today. 10 years down 8 basis points. It's at 3.99. And the U.S. 30 years at 3.91. It's down 10 basis points. So we got fallen yields today. And finishing up with the U.S. dollar index. It's at 104.81. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say to you guys is a World War III or a nuclear scenario, it's not out of the question. But it's not an absolute that it's going to happen. Like some of these channels, you go to, and they're like, it's going to happen tomorrow. They're like, prepare, get your bunkers, blah, 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 blah. And they get you all fired up. You say, oh my gosh, they're going to blow the world up. Not necessarily. It's not destined to happen like that. It's one of those things that could happen. A possibility. Wherever there's nuclear weapons, it is a possibility. But it's one of those things where the odds of it really happening are not that great. There's so many things that could happen that could stop it from happening. But we are definitely headed in a more tense direction towards that than we have been in a very long time. In other words, the odds of it happening are much higher than they have been all those years when the Cold War was ended. In other words, we're much closer to midnight right now than we have been any time I've been alive. Or anybody in my audience has been alive. Right now, we're the closest to it. But don't hold your breath waiting for it to happen. In other words, what I'm saying. But you can still prepare just in case it does happen. And what I'm talking about is preparing on the cheap. Because an awful lot of us haven't got any money. It's just that if you do make yourself a really small fallout shelter, out of I don't know what, who knows, maybe you'll bury an old car with your backhoe in the backyard. Make sure there's ventilation, adequate ventilation. And as far as nuclear radiation coming in through your vents, if there was a world war, if there was a nuclear event, it would be a hell of a lot less radiation than it would be if you were right out in the fallout. If you're inside a shelter. A little bit might come in through the vents, but it wouldn't be near as significant as the amount that you would get if you were right out in the fallout. Especially they talk about rain. I guess it's extremely bad if the fallout's coming down in the rain and you get out and you get wet in that rain. you get really, if say there's a nuclear explosion and you're not far away, say 20 miles away from it, and the fallout goes and intermixes into the rain and comes down as nuclear radiation in the rain. And I guess if it gets on you and you get all wet in it, you're really going to get dosed bad. So, and also fallout can come down in many forms, not just rain. It can also come down as very tiny debris, like dust, comes down and lands on your house and things, or on your car. So if there is a nuclear war and you see dust all over your car and stuff, that could be nuclear fallout. And that fallout, it loses its radioactive element very, very rapidly. After it's something like 90% of it's neutralized in the first few days, and then after 2 weeks, it's like 99% of it's neutralized. So I guess one of the big tricks would be, if there was a nuclear war, is staying out of the fallout. Even if it's just staying inside your house, if your house is still intact. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening to my show. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.